Coming up on The Daily with me, Neil Patterson. Donald Trump wants to take control of the Gaza Strip, or the Gaza Riviera, as the real estate mogul turned president calls it. Might his ultimate rationale be the bottom line and making top dollar?
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100, every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, I was sitting next to a colleague in the news conference, and as he said it, we looked at each other instinctively, just looked at each other, and we're just like, did he mean to say that? You know, there's a chance everyone does it that he misspoke, but no, he didn't. He repeated it again and again and again, that America would take ownership of the Gaza Strip. It was truly a moment I'll remember.
Well, that's my stateside Sky News colleague and one of the hosts of our Trump 100 podcast, Mark Stone, expressing the shock, the awe, the all-round rolling of eyes at the latest from Trump 2.0. Flanked by Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu, the US president told the world he thought Palestinians would prefer not to return to Gaza. It's not yet clear how many Palestinians, he asked, before he arrived at that conclusion. Nor indeed any of the leaders of the countries to which the president imagines Palestinians would be relocated. I'll say it again because it does bear repeating. Donald Trump has just suggested Palestinians leave Gaza and the US take over and turn it into the Gaza Riviera. We will get the broader view with our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn once he's lifted his jaw from the floor. But we're going to kick off in Jerusalem. Alistair Bunkall, our Middle East correspondent. Ali, look, honestly, did anyone see this coming?
No, not in these terms, no. I mean, Trump has a couple of times in the past, week or 10 days, said out loud that perhaps Palestinians should leave Gaza for Egypt or Jordan. But this is the first time that he embellished on that thought, and boy did he embellish on it, saying that the Americans would, quote, own Gaza, they would rebuild it, and that this could be what he described as a Middle East Riviera.
Yeah, and more on that in just a second. But of course, he made this announcement of sorts sitting next to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He didn't look desperately surprised.
He looked very happy. Don't just listen to what Donald Trump had to say in that press conference. Look at Benjamin Netanyahu's face. This is a political gift to him. He went to Washington knowing that it would be a major moment for his leadership and for the future of Israel, Gaza, and the Middle East. It's no ordinary visit by a leader to a US president. But he's under a lot of domestic political pressure because he has far-right parties in his coalition who are opposed to the ceasefire. One of those parties, led by Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister, has already quit in protest of the ceasefire. Itamar Ben-Gvir has said, this is what I was saying all along. People mocked me when I made the suggestion a year and a half ago, but now look, the US president is saying it. Let's push forward with it. Bezalel Smotrich, who's remained in the government, another far-right extremist minister, when Trump a couple of days ago suggested Gazans moving to Jordan and Egypt, immediately said, my team and I are going to work on concrete policy plans as to how to achieve that. So there are plenty here welcoming it. I should say there are many commentators in Israel as well who are equally stunned by it and also don't see how this is a realistic proposition.
Yeah. I mean, so at least in the short term, this gives Benjamin Netanyahu some political breathing room, as you say. But just describe the scale of the challenge presented by turning it into the Gaza Riviera. I mean, it strikes me that we are decades away from that happening, even given the fact that Donald Trump is a property speculator extraordinaire.
I mean, Gaza is a complete mess. I've seen it for myself. So much of it is totally destroyed. And when you drive or walk around it, and the limited times I've been able to, it really is almost impossible to get your head across how it can be rebuilt. The volume of rubble and destruction is unbelievable. So whoever rebuilds it, however it is rebuilt, will take, probably decades. Can Trump do that in the way that he suggested at the White House? I don't think so. I think it is totally unrealistic for so many reasons. The idea of America owning Gaza. But perhaps Donald Trump knows that himself. Perhaps this is Trump tactic 101, throw out the most outrageous idea and have that as the starting point for negotiations.
And it wasn't just Gaza that President Trump mentioned in the Oval Office. The West Bank got a nod as well. I mean, what's going to happen there?
Yeah, this has sort of gone a little bit more under the radar. And he was asked by an Israeli journalist what his thoughts were on Israeli annexation of the West Bank, to which he gave a non-committal answer, but said there might be more news on that in the next 4 weeks. Now, that sounds pretty ominous for Palestinians living in the West Bank. They have already been living under, over many, many years, increased settlement expansion. Israeli settlements are illegal under international law. Currently, there is a major Israeli counter-terror operation, particularly focused on the northern West Bank, Jenin, and some other towns. And so there's a real fear in the West Bank amongst Palestinians that the current Israeli government, in conjunction with the new American government, will seek to force Palestinians out of the West Bank as well.
Ali, look, final point. If Trump's plan came to fruition, and clearly neither you nor I see that happening just yet anyway, doesn't it mean an end to the idea, the long-held idea, of a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine?
I think realistically, the two-state solution has been dead for a long time for multiple reasons. Diplomats over here and in Western capitals still cling to that idea. And to be honest, very few people have any alternative to a two-state solution. A one-state solution wouldn't be acceptable to the Israelis either, because it would mean a fairly equal ratio between Palestinians and Jewish Israelis. A two-state solution isn't welcome to many Israelis, particularly not Benjamin Netanyahu, who's never been a proponent of it, particularly not his government. And so, there is really no viable solution on the table at the moment.
Alistair Bunkall in Jerusalem, thank you. So how has the wider Middle East been reacting to Trump's plan for Palestinians to leave Gaza, for it to be turned into another Mediterranean Riviera, a Medalago, if you will? Dominic Waghorn is our international affairs editor. Dom, how's it gone down?
All those countries in the region who have the ability to take them in have said this is a non-starter. The Palestinians belong in Gaza. They belong in what they hope will be a Palestinian state, and they're not going to play ball. So it's a non-starter, but it has implications and repercussions. It says a lot about Donald Trump, potentially, and it says a lot about, I think, the possibility of the ceasefire deal and what 4 years under Donald Trump might mean for the Middle East.
But can we just be absolutely clear about this? The forced deportation of Palestinians would be itself unlawful. I mean, certainly that appears to be the position of the United Nations.
Yeah, this wouldn't be the forced deportation, to be fair to Donald Trump. Yeah, look, if you were to go in there and to force people out, and we're talking about 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, or maybe less now because so many have died in the war since October the 7th. If you were to go in there and by force remove them, or to carry out massacres, to terrify them into moving, which is how many Palestinians were forced to flee back in 1948, then that would be ethnic cleansing. What the president seems to be suggesting, however deludedly, is that you could encourage that 2 million people to leave because they want to. And then you could create circumstances somewhere which would be so delightful and wonderful and nice, to use his words, that they would want to stay there and wouldn't want to go back. But as I say, there's nowhere for them to go. There's no country prepared to take them in. All of America's allies in the West and in the region have said this is a non-starter, and what is required is for Palestinians to stay there and for some kind of progress to be made towards a two-state solution so they can have a homeland to live in alongside the Israelis.
I do get the tendency we all have to view everything that Donald Trump does as a move in a game of 3D chess, because otherwise, you might think it utterly inexplicable. But when it comes to the cost, I mean, Donald Trump says the United States wants to take over, but the US isn't going to be putting up any money. So it's not going to happen. So isn't this just more words from Donald Trump?
What exactly is going on in the mind of Donald Trump in saying this isn't entirely clear. But I think what's important to say is the implications for where we are now. This proposal I think the biggest problem with it is it strengthens the extremists on both sides. So for those on the far right of Israeli politics, it's music to their ears. It's exactly what they have wanted to hear from an American president. It emboldens them to ask for more in terms of Gaza, to push harder, to have Israeli troops stay in Gaza, to push harder for the reoccupation of Gaza, to see settlements go back into Gaza. They've not been there for 20 years, and their uprooting was a terrible tragedy for those on the far right of Israeli politics. So it just makes those on the far right believe there's more for them to fight for. And on the other extreme, in Palestinian politics, it makes Hamas able to say they have the moral high ground. They are now standing, they would say, against an American president and an Israeli prime minister who seem to be advocating, in certainly how they see it, ethnic cleansing. And they will appeal to people around the world to support them in that. And whenever the extremists are strengthened in the Middle East, there is a lack of progress towards moderation and compromise, which is what the region and Gaza particularly needs. You need to see diplomatic progress towards some kind of compromise where this war can be brought to an end, the hostages can be released, a ceasefire can be imposed, and then possibly progress towards a longer-term solution. God knows what that would be at this point.
Well, that was going to be my point. I mean, given the comments from Hamas, Iran, and others, hasn't that half-hour news conference in the Oval Office with Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, hasn't the main thing that it has actually done is it's put the ceasefire at risk and the return of Israeli hostages at risk?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's certainly an argument that is being made from those sort of more moderately minded observers here, because it encourages, as I say, those on the far right of Israeli politics to dig their heels in. And the suspicion is that Benjamin Netanyahu is saying to them, don't worry about the ceasefire deal. It's never going to get to stages 2 and 3. We're never going to have to pull out completely. Whereas the Americans are saying that Donald Trump is being advised to say to Netanyahu, look, make the ceasefire deal go all the way through, and then you can go back in if you need to fight Hamas. That would be unacceptable to those on the far right. So it gives more ammunition, I suppose, to those who would like to wreck this deal, undoubtedly. And it also, I think, undermines the confidence that America's allies have in this president, who obviously have doubts about him already. And America will need the support of allies like Britain and France and Germany and the European Union if more progress is to be made towards a diplomatic solution to this terrible conflict that's killed tens of thousands of Palestinians. If they don't know where they stand with Donald Trump, it's going to make that kind of constructive, cooperative diplomacy all the more challenging.
Dom, I'm just going to assume your tactic of seeing method in the apparent madness for a second. Isn't he signalling the strongest support for Israel, not just to Israel itself, but to everyone in the region who would wish the Jewish state wiped off the face of the planet? I mean, it's not a coincidence he's talking about Iran as well today.
I think the problem for Donald Trump is actually it acts against his more longer-term plans for the region. He sees himself clearly as a deal maker. He's very proud of the fact that the Abraham Accords that were negotiated and pushed forward by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, were one of the great diplomatic achievements of decades, effectively, of American diplomacy in the region. That was a process of normalization between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and other Gulf states. And ultimately, that's hope will include Saudi Arabia. And certainly Saudi Arabia has sort of indicated that that is possible further down the road. And now this is going to make it harder for Saudi Arabia to engage in that process, because you have a president who's certainly being seen by many as advocating the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. It also strengthens Iran's hands because Iran is a supporter of Hamas. Iran will now also say, look, we have a deranged American president in Washington doing the bidding of the far-right Jewish extremists in Jerusalem. He's someone we can't negotiate with, however much he says a deal would be nice, and they will claim the moral high ground as well. So diplomatically, it goes against two of his main objectives in his second term in office. One is a normalization deal with the Saudis, and another one is some kind of nuclear deal with the Iranians, which is, I think, another reason why people are literally scratching their heads and wondering why he went out on a limb in such a way and said this. And not just that, but also said America would take control of Gaza. That sounds like a completely mad idea for which there can be no possible support in any branch of American government, possibly, outside at least a very narrow group of his own advisors, if there is with that even.
Thanks, Dom. We are back with more from Dominic in just a moment.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kelnick.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.
Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, is still here, having tried to, if not make complete sense of Donald Trump's Gaza Riviera plans, then at least put them into a bit of context. But for a bit of a change, Dom, how about I have a go now? Isn't it possible there is just a simple answer? The bottom line. He is a hotelier. Donald Trump's a real estate mogul. His son-in-law has actually been out there talking about how expensive waterfront properties could be in Gaza. Isn't it just possible this is all about making bank, as the kids say?
Yeah, absolutely. And that may be the best explanation for this. You know, on the face of it, if you are someone who's ignorant in the ways and the mindsets and culture and history of the Middle East, then it kind of makes sense. You know, this is a narrow strip of land that has great potential from a real estate point of view, something that Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, who's a New Jersey real estate developer and speculator and investor, would see. And also, obviously, of course, Donald Trump, the great real estate developer himself. You know, it's a narrow strip of land, and the people there have had a very hard time. And it's brought them nothing but suffering, as he says, and death and carnage for not just the last year or two, but for decades. This is how Kushner talks about it as well. You know, it's nothing but trouble for both the Israelis and the Egyptians. So you solve Gaza, you move people out, and then, you know, hey presto, you've solved one of the biggest problems in the Middle East. But that's totally ignoring reality. It's a bad idea because no one's going to cooperate with it. No other country is going to take these Gazans in. But most importantly, they don't want to leave. And I think for people listening, that might be a strange idea. You know, someone said to me over the weekend, well, why don't they want to leave? You know, what Gaza looks like hell on earth. Why would you want to live there? And all I can say is that, you know, it's for the same reason as someone in a place in Oklahoma called Tornado Alley, who I spoke to after the second tornado there in 15 years. I said, why do you live in a place called Tornado Alley? And he said, well, because it's home. This is why I've lived all my life, and it's a great place to live. Gazans feel that's their home. They're hugely proud of it. They're proud of their heritage. They love living there, despite all its massive, you know, setbacks and problems. But there's an added complexion, which is I think 1.6 million of them are descended from refugees who were thrown out, as far as they're concerned, of their homeland, of their villages in 1948. And it would be a massive betrayal for them of their forefathers and foremothers' rights and the right of return that they believe they have if they were to acquiesce in any kind of plan to move them, however attractive it was.
Let's turn this on its head, try and look at it from a different direction. I mean, those wise old owls at the State Department that could tell Donald Trump in 5 minutes just why this is daft, they're the ones who've been trying to sort out the Israel-Palestine situation for decades. This is time for bold action. It's time to try something different, and that's exactly what he's doing.
That is exactly the argument that Jared Kushner made. And when he talks about his successes in the first term of office, he makes the point that he slaughtered one sacred cow after another, the shibboleths of the foreign policy establishment in the Middle East. You know, he was told that you move the American embassy to Jerusalem and war will break out. You scrap America's signature on the JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal, and the region will be engulfed in flames. And yet, as he's in his words, you know, they did that, and the next day the sun rose and the sun went down. Now, critics would say one of those achievements was the normalization process. That led to a massive amount of anxiety and unsettling nervousness amongst Palestinians. And that then led to Hamas feeling it was being left out and then striking Israel as ferociously as it did on October the 7th. Others would say it would have done that anyway. But obviously, if you take a disruptive approach to a region, it can lead to further disruption down the line. Another criticism, though, of this more disruptive and creative, if you like, out-of-the-box kind of diplomacy that the Trump administration has certainly brought the first time around and clearly hopes to bring around a second time, is that it always seems to favour the Israeli point of view and gives the Palestinians nothing. So it moves the embassy to Jerusalem. It accepts the annexation of the Golan. It does what the Israelis have always wanted. But in return for those massive concessions to the Israelis, Trump never said, can you stop settlement building or whatever? And therefore, the Palestinians would feel it's been creative and innovative, but only in one direction. And that makes them even less inclined to go along with it now.
Dom, let's just step back from what Donald Trump has said on this occasion. Aren't we, journalists, politicians, diplomats, the public, aren't we doing exactly the same thing we did during his first term? Every time Donald Trump opens his mouth and words fall out, or he opens his Twitter account and accidentally types Covfefe, we all start analysing it like it's a tablet descended from Mount Sinai.
I think, the danger is, his supporters don't take him literally. They take him seriously. His critics take him literally, but not seriously. But, we may be surprised. But the fundamental problem is that you can't move 2 million people unless they want to move, and you can't move them anywhere if there's nowhere for them to go to. And at the moment, no one seems to want to go along with this idea. So, yeah, clearly he's been underestimated and misunderstood, and he achieved more things in the first term in office than was given credit for at the time, because it seemed so sort of paradigm shifting and so outrageous. We didn't really see through to what he did achieve. But I think fundamentally this proposal seems to be dead in the water.
Dom, thank you. For the very latest on things Donald Trump says with straight face, do head to skynews.com, and that Trump 100 podcast out earlier today, also worth your time to hear more from Mark Stone about the announcement. But that is your lot for today. We're back again tomorrow.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.